good evening, everyone, and welcome to the OVCA's session on the implications associated with COVID and how we can return to curling. I'm Doug Kreviazuk. I'm the moderator for tonight's session, and I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all the OVCA clubs joining us here this evening. Now, generally, when I think about the OVCA's AGM, it's to discuss regional business, and there's usually a light atmosphere. But I don't think so as much tonight. The outbreak and the spread of COVID-19 has had an impact on virtually every Canadian or citizen in the globe. While we all want to simply get back to our old way of life and continue to enjoy what life has to offer, we must address the elephant in the room, COVID-19. And we're not alone. Not all, if not all sport, are wrestling with the dilemma of how to reopen the sports facility and curling clubs. And we want to do it in a safe manner, but we also want to make sure that for the venues, this remains profitable. So tonight, I have three knowledgeable individuals from our sport that I'm confident you probably already know. On the line, and you won't see him on the picture, is Danny Lamoureux, Director of Club Development and Event Operations with Curl Canada. We have Steve Indig, who's the Managing Director for Sport Law and Strategy Group, and Steve Chenier, the Executive Director for CurlON. Our goal this evening is to share with you expert views and best practices in hopes that we're all able to make a safe and effective return to curling this season. Now, following the remarks of the panelists, the panel will respond to the questions that were previously sent in by member clubs for our attention. So let's get on with it. We have a lot to cover this evening in 1 hour, so we'll get started and kick it off with Steve Indig. Steve?
Okay, you can hear me, guys? Thumbs up. Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me tonight. For those of you who don't know me, as Doug said, my name's Steve Indig. I'm a lawyer with the Sport Law and Strategy Group. We're an organization that works exclusively in amateur sport across the country with little clubs to national sport federations, multi-sport federations, and everybody in between. For those of you who have never been to our website, it's sportlaw.ca, pretty easy to remember. And we have about 1,000 articles there that you can search and that are accessible, talking about COVID-related issues, as well as any other issue that you would see in sport, risk management, employment, waivers, etc. So I've been told tonight that I have 10 minutes, which is going to be a bit of a challenge being a lawyer. So I'm going to try my best to get as much as I can in the time allotted, and of course, happy to reply to any questions that anybody may have. I've been doing webinars quite often and trying to assist sport in returning back to somewhat what we would quote call normal. And I want to say I'm going to talk a little bit about the liability associated with returning to sport and how do we do that in a safe way. But I do want to say also that I'm a very big advocate for returning to sport. If we're going to wait, I'm not sure what we're waiting for. If it's going to be a cure, I think we can all guess as to when that's going to come into play and how long that would take to have everybody take it. And so that's why I think waiting is not really particularly the best option, but managing the risk is where we can really focus our attention. My line these days is hurry up and slow down. So yes, I want you to get back to sport, but I want you to do it carefully, cautiously, and you really have one opportunity to do this. And a lot of the catalyst of the things that I talk about relate to, first and foremost, insurance. So majority of insurers will, if not all of them, will no longer provide contagious disease coverage, meaning that if there is a claim made related to COVID-19 or SARS or Ebola, I've got a list in front of me here, that means the organization's insurance policy would not kick in to provide legal defense fees or damages. It means the organization would be on its own. So what we want to do, because we have that level of risk now directly on the association without the ability for insurance, is how do we create that safe environment so when our participants come back, we can create that safety. Now, not only are we going to talk about liability today, but one of the other things I think is important to address is people. Somebody wrote this into the question box the other day doing one of these webinars and saying, you know, really appreciate the legal side of this, but don't forget the humanistic side of this. We do not want people to get sick, and we do not particularly want them to get sick in our curling clubs. So again, there's an additional level of responsibility there to say, we want to prevent liability, but we also want to make sure our participants are healthy. The majority of claims that would be made relating to a COVID-related matter is under negligence. You should have done something differently, or you shouldn't have done it at all, or you should have done it better. In order to be negligent in sport, there's a 4-part test. Excuse me, the first part of the test is, do we owe a duty of care? And in sport, usually it's fairly black and white. As clubs, do we owe a duty to our participants? Yes. As occupiers, some of you may own your own building. Do you have a duty to provide a safe environment? Yes. And you can see the first part of the test is check. The second part of the test I'll come back to, which is standard of care. The third part of the test is harm or loss. And that means that somebody actually has to have been injured, which can be compensated with monetary value. So we hope, if God forbid someone were to get COVID, that they're asymptomatic, that we don't know about it, that they don't know about it, and they have no symptoms or damage. A majority of people have flu-like symptoms, but very few people are being on respirators for months and on end or dying. So that's where we don't want people to be. And that's, of course, adds the more seriousness of the illness, that's where the damages would potentially get higher. And the fourth part of the test is causation. Did our breach of our standard of care tie into the harm or loss? Did we cause the COVID? Did we not do everything we should have done to create that safe environment, and someone did acquiesce and did get COVID? So the second part of the test is where I want to focus most of our attention today, is standard of care. What should we be doing? And I want you to think of standard of care like a line. And the question is where is that line? Is it high? Is it low? Is it in the medium? And to help define where that line is based on 4 criteria. Unwritten rules. What's happening in the trends in the industry? What's happening with other curling clubs? What's being dictated by our provincial sport bodies and Curling Canada? That helps establish where that line is, and looking at the Curling Canada and the CurlON return to play protocols is going to be really establishing that foundation of what we need to do. The second part of a standard of care is your gut, common sense, intuition, knowledge. The 50 cohort rule was something that was implemented in Alberta months ago, and now it's being implemented in Ontario, I guess 2 weeks ago. A lot of organizations, particularly in Alberta, were very cautious to go to 50. They wanted to start off with 20 and then 30 and see if they could manage it. Follow your gut with respect to the management of your return to play. Don't feel you have to go 0 to 100, and use, again, your common sense. The third component of standard of care is, what have the courts said? And of course, the courts have not said anything particularly with COVID, as they've been closed and they've been backed up. But what most courts will say is you have to act reasonable. What would a reasonable person do in a similar circumstance? And again, that's why it's so important to follow those guidelines, to follow the trends in the industry, and remember what is reasonable. And I like sharing this story. It's a bit comical, but I think it's relevant. I did get a haircut a couple months ago and do need to go again. And before I was able to walk into the hair salon, they stopped me at the door. I had a mask on. They took my temperature. There was a table in front of me with hygiene products. And after she said, you don't have any symptoms, or asked me the questions of, do I feel okay? She said, how can I help you? And I said, well, I'd like to get a haircut. She said, we just sanitized that couch over there. No one sat on it. You can sit there and wait, and we'll get to you in 15 minutes. And then 15 minutes later, she came over and literally gave me a garbage bag that went from my head to my knees. I couldn't touch anything if I wanted to. They cut my hair, and as I was leaving, I tapped my credit card, and you could see them sanitizing my workstation. I was quite impressed with the way they handled their due diligence, their reasonableness, as something as trivial as getting a haircut. And I would say that's the same thing. We want to be able to explain to the public, to the members, we have done all these things to create that safe environment. The last component of standard of care is written rules. As lawyers, we love to say, hey, Doug, hey, Steve, it says here at section 2, you're going to do A, B, C. You better do it. Because if you haven't, you've given a lawyer exhibit A for cross-examination. Follow those trends in the industry. The foundational component is government regulations. We must comply with government regulations. And then we may have more restrictions put in place based on CurlON or curl obligations. So together, all of those factors create that line. And we're not saying to the public or to the membership that we are going to have a COVID-free environment. I think we all know that that's not possible. The law does not expect perfection. The law expects reasonableness. And that's where we want to be. We want to be up here in the upper part of that square to say we did everything possible. There are actually people in sport who have been paralyzed, who have been unsuccessful in litigation because the organization and the coach was able to prove that they created a safe environment and the risk that occurred was part of the sport to which they were injured. And that's the language that we want to deal with. Now, that's the legal test. Now, how can we manage it? Of course, that's through risk management, is putting in controls to modernize or mitigate risk. Risk management, really quite simple process. Identify the risk, evaluate the likelihood of it happening, and then how can we control it? And when we talk about COVID-related risks, there's compliance risk. Can we comply with the written regulations established by the government, established by CurlON, established by Curling Canada? And if we can't, you need to have a conversation with somebody before you open your doors. A secondary risk is financial risk. You guys all know what it's been like the last 6 months. I've had clients lose millions of dollars, and it's been a big stretch. We say if you have a reserve fund, we're saving it for a rainy day. It is raining. Look at that money to keep you through operations. Look at government programs that are available to you that have been extended to at least, I believe, the end of December or close to it. Run 48 different scenarios. If we have 10% capacity, what does that look like? If our bar is closed, what does that look like? Because as you probably know, you hear the same things I do. Is there a second wave coming? Are we being required to close again? Are we going to reduce our capacity from 50 back down to 10? Who knows? And that's why we have to be really diligent on our financial management. The last two things on the risk side is communication. Tell your participants what you guys are doing. Let them know the risks that there are by coming back. We cannot create or promise a COVID-free environment. It doesn't work that way. Let your participants know the risks associated with coming back and the great things and protocols you're going to be implementing to create that safe environment. The last two things on risk, program risk. Some organizations are no longer offering young children's programming, particularly those under 8, because they're not sure they would be able to socially distance. And then, of course, there's the reputational risk. We do not want to be known as the COVID club, okay? So you know that's going to have a long-term effect on your organization. So what are some of the risk management techniques that we can be using? Try and find, and there are out there several risk assessment tools. The Own the Podium put out one. Steve, if you don't have a copy of it, we can share it and send it to all the clubs. There's a risk assessment tool for sport. Look again at the minimum standards required by government regulations, and then look at your own policies and practices. We want to have constant communication. We want to have systems for regular cleaning, sanitization, and inspection. Keep a record of what you did. Again, in litigation, I want to know who did what, when, so we can make a justification to say that we met the required standard of care. How long do you keep those records? The difficult legal answer is forever. In an electronic age, scan it, keep it on a file. Keep it on a USB key. You don't need to keep the originals. Post clear signs about social distancing. about arrows on direction, where to go. We're all seeing this happen at the grocery store, at the liquor. I'm sure everyone's been to the liquor store and they've seen the things they've done there. Look for daily attestations, ask those questions about how you're feeling and document it. And then look at implementing waivers, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in 1 second. So I'll talk about it right now. Sorry, before I do that, people always routinely ask about the declarations. How often do we do them? Try and do them as often as possible. A lot of times there's the legal side and there's the reality side. Legally, I would love for you to do an attestation every time somebody comes into the club. Steve Chenier, how do you feel? Are you okay? Do you have any symptoms? If you do you acknowledge that you'll share them with us? You'll leave the club. Check, check, check. My son's playing baseball. They just returned to competition last week in a cohort of 50. And on TeamSnap, which is their scheduling app, there's actually a health questionnaire that we were required to fill out prior to our game. So there's different technology out there to do this rather than having someone stand at the door and ask those questions. Either one works, but again, you can look at different mechanisms to deal with that. Waivers. I was just telling Doug and Steve before we got on the call that I've been writing waivers for 18 years and I've had more feedback on waivers the last 3 months than I had in the previous 18 years. People are starting to read them, people are starting to ask questions, and again, you have to understand what they do and what the intended purpose of a waiver is. And yes, they are valid. People will say, are they worth the paper they're written on? And the answer is maybe, and I'll explain why, but the answer can be a yes. There are two types of risks in sport. There's physical risk and there's legal risk. The physical risk of curling is coming onto the ice with slippery shoes, very heavy rock, and saying that you are not going to get hit with the rock or fall on the ice or get hit with a broom or run into another participant. Those are the risks associated with the game of curling. And we really don't need a contract to ask for those risks to be waived. We assume those risks by playing the sport of curling. What we do need a legal contract for is to waive negligence. Now, this is really important to understand. Waiving negligence is basically saying, hey, Doug and Steve, come curl. You might hurt yourself. It might be our fault, but you can't sue us. That's not a benefit. Children, minors, parents cannot waive negligence on behalf of their kids or themselves. When I say themselves, I mean on behalf of their children. So we like to do two documents. We like to do a waiver for adults, and we like to do what we call an assumption of risk, where we explain the risk of coming back to a curling club during COVID, but we don't ask for that release. We don't ask for that indemnity because the courts will not enforce it. We do ask for it to help support the club. Waivers are not for the benefit of our participants. They are the benefit of the organization, because what they do say is come play, you might get hurt, you might catch COVID. We may or may not have done everything possible to create that environment, but you can't sue us. So ethically, you have to have your decision on whether you're going to mandate waivers for your participants. I'm assuming the majority of curling participants will be adults, and you need to have your ethical decision made. I like to share this story. It's comical but true. I play pickup basketball quite avidly, or did, and there's a facility near my house, and I know the owner. And I walked in, and he said, "Sign this waiver." And it was a very broad waiver. It included everything, including the negligence of the organization, which it should. And I said to the owner, I said, "Why should I sign this?" And he said, "Well, sign it or get out." So his ethical decision was that was in his best interest as a manager of the organization to have that signature included. So I think again, from an ethical perspective, you have to understand what your position is. But I got to say, in today's climate, without insurance, I really think we have to put the reputation and the stability of the organization first. And I really like the use of a waiver, particularly in today's current climate. Make sure that the waiver includes the club, make sure it includes the provincial body, make sure it includes the national body. We want to be in this together. And in order to rely on a waiver, you have to be included. It's a contract. You can't rely on a waiver after the fact. Make sure the wording is clear and concise. Please do not add it to the back of your 4-page registration policy in 8 font. Make sure it's clear. I like to see it as a standalone document, and make sure it includes all the activities you want covered: practice, competition, tournaments, travel, everything related to the operation of a curling club. How long do you keep it? Again, forever. So scan it, keep it. If you are going with online execution of waivers, the A standard is a distinctive signature, something that shows that Steve Indig signed it. If you can't do that and your software won't allow it, a tick box and typing your name is the next best thing, but I would try and do a distinctive signature if possible. I'm going to talk about 3 more things, Doug, and then I'm done. I'm just cognitive of time, so like I said, I'm trying. The last 3 things I want to talk about is, one is the corporate veil. If you are an unincorporated entity, please look into incorporation. The law recognizes 2 things: people and corporations. And if I'm going to be sued, I'm suing either one. If there is no corporate entity to sue, I'm suing the individuals responsible for the decision making. When you incorporate, you establish what's called a corporate veil, and those people in the veil, coaches, directors, officers, members, are protected from personal liability. The corporate liability will exist, but the personal liability will not exist. My wife runs a small softball league, started off with 4 teams. We incorporated from day one because I was not prepared to lose my life savings and my house because somebody unfortunately took a line drive to the forehead. We incorporated, the league has grown, which makes it even more valuable. But at the time, it was really important to get that done. The last thing I'll talk about is, what's the actual possibility of being sued on a COVID claim? In my opinion, it's low. Most lawyers work on a contingency fee, meaning that they get a percentage of the winnings. Without insurance, there's actually no pot of money to actually ascertain. So depending on the status of the financials of the club, there may or not actually be the ability to win something and collect. And then, of course, you have to prove causation. You have to prove that the conduct of the club caused the COVID. That could be a very challenging thing. Doug, were you at the grocery store today? Doug, did you go to the gas station? Doug, did your wife leave the house or your spouse leave the house? It would be very difficult to actually prove that the cause was the club, of course, unless there's a massive outbreak within the organization. So really, again, I just want to reiterate, I'm a very big fan of going back to sport. Hurry up, slow down, really emphasize that standard of care and going back. Be cautious in how you do it. And really, again, we want to be able to stand in front of a judge, which is always my test, to be able to tell our story that we created a reasonable, safe environment. So I will digress there, and of course, stay on, guys, to answer questions.
Thanks, Steve. While you were talking, you know, Danny Lamoureux is online. Danny has prepared templates, forms that includes waivers, and he's forwarded them to Paul. Paul, can you make sure that all the audience participants receive the material from Danny? I think that having an easy example will make their lives a lot better. Okay. So now we'll move on to Steve Chenier, who will give us a perspective. I think it'll be more from the provincial and the operational side. So Steve, over to you.
Hi everyone, thanks for doing this at the OVCA level and asking us to participate and try and move things along and get our clubs open and moving. I know everybody has a ton of questions around a lot of the issues with Regulation 364, but we've sort of got some clearances today that just came through, and I'm just going to share my screen here. I have a bit of a PowerPoint presentation to go through as we talk. So I've sent this along. Paul's going to be able to forward it to you after the meeting if you want. I broke it down in a couple of things: the government health restrictions, safety for all, operating in a COVID world. So one of the biggest rules regarding this was the 50-person indoor limit that Steve was speaking about earlier that came from Alberta. We've been given this authority now to have 50 people in our building. And the nice thing is we've also been given the event space to be allowed to have 50 people under a spectator perspective. So considering ourselves as an arena rink or similar to an arena facility, we have two distinct areas. We have a curling ice system and we have a lounge. So under the protocol 4.2, I believe is the next slide, you can see that it clearly states here that right here, 50 spectators. If the spectators will be indoors, they must be able to keep a 2-meter distance, which is very, very critical and very, very important for us as an organization. So it's a good new, and just came out today. We got the ministry's legal people to put it to writing so that we can officially declare it. So that is a really good phase for our clubs, an operational grid. So you're not automatically authorized to have 50 people as spectators. That duty of care, as Steve was just talking about in his responsibilities, is that you must be able to provide 2 meters of separation amongst spectators. So you got to redo your lounge or your lobby setup. You also you have to be very cautious when we're bringing people in and out of the building. If somebody's coming in to go curl, where are they changing? Where are they changing their shoes? If you're using your locker rooms, which is allowable, then they must go access to the ice. They can't sort of stand around. And remember how we always used to come in the club, stand around, maybe go get a drink, stand around and talk to the guys that were just coming off the ice. That's a no-no nowadays. So we have to keep a clear and distinct pathway that identifies our direct way to go to the ice. Meaning, if a person's in that, an inspector comes walking in and starts doing a head count and goes, there's 53 people in here. Yes, those 3 people are in the walkway to the ice surface and are distinct and clearly away from the rest of the group. That's your defense, and everybody else is maintaining a 2-meter separation. Okay, great. You guys are doing your job. Good job. Go forward. The 2-meter separation rule gets thrown away when you go out on the ice, right? I'm not saying we should throw it away. I'm saying if in a team sport, people understand that, we may not be fully at 2 meters at all times, right? The skips passing by each other or the throwers passing by each other as they're moving. We're working, curling. Danny did a great job with his return to play document, identifying ways that we can try and do this safely and accordingly. And we have to continue working on that side of the world and making sure that, not the 2 skips aren't standing over top of each other and checking line out and breathing down each other's back or neck, and 2 sweepers down to 1 sweeper to be able to keep that distance. But it is not a mandatory. So same thing with hockey. Right now, you can't play hockey if you're body checking or you're trying to do a face-off. There's no way you're going to do 2 meters distancing unless they're going to change the length of the sticks. So curling is in the same boat. You can waive that right when you get onto the ice surface. Just going through the other comments here. Making sure that you follow all occupational health and safety measures and acts are very, very, very important. And even more important, as you heard Steve talk about, one of the duties of care is document, right? In theory, you really should document when you walk outside and spread salt, let's say, during an ice storm. We salted the walkway at 5:20 and again at 6:10 and then again at 6:30 before curlers started showing up. It's the same with COVID. We cleaned our process. This is our process for our daily cleaning. Here's what we do between shifts, and here's what we do between draws. And our ice tech has done the work and due diligence. Anybody that comes into work, there is a return to work declaration, for lack of a better term, that we're going to be including in our package for you. And they should sign that every day saying, yep, I am not sick today and everything was great. I've not been around anybody that's sick, and away you go. Those are just things that we need to do to consistently be ahead of the curve so that we are keeping ourselves away from a duty of responsibility, so that we're like Steve said, we're above that line. So please monitor those, and we're going to be giving you some documentation in regards to that later on today. The one thing with restaurant, bar, and food, they have increased they put in a new measure that bars and restaurants in Ontario are required to keep client logs for a period of 30 days and to disclose the client logs to the medical officer of health or an inspector under the Health and Promotion Act on request, which will support case for contact tracing. So this basically means anybody who's in your lounge must be tracked. Anybody that's been out and about in the community and gone out for, say, a dinner at a restaurant here in Ontario, you would have had to supply, somebody in the group would have had to supply a contact name and number, just to go and sit down and have a drink or a pop. They're not allowed to bring you into the restaurant without that thing. So curling is going to be going under the same purview, and I know that's going to cause a lot of consternation for clubs. So we're in the process of creating an easy to use application that will allow you to have your members register, and they'll be able to walk by a kiosk, which we're going to provide to you, to our member clubs at no charge. Every club in Ontario will have one, and you're going to be able to walk by and show your cell phone, let's say, or a paper copy, and it will scan and it'll say, hey, Steve Chenier walked into the club at 12:47, period. And then then that report will be generated and maintained on a database for 30 days, and then wipe clean every 30 days. So there's we're not trying to contact trace anything. We're not trying to do anything crazy and monitor who's coming in out of your buildings. We're just creating a report that if for some reason we ever ran into an outbreak or somebody was positive, that we could easily provide the requirements to the ministry on a moment's notice. And this will protect you and help cover you in your plans. So that is a major. The other thing is you know what, everybody has to be sitting. There's none of this Harry going over to the other table and saying, how'd you miss that shot in the seventh end? Everybody must be sitting when they're in the lounge. And with a lot of this communities, Ottawa being one, you must wear a mask when you're not eating or drinking, which means if you stand up from the table to go to the washroom or leave the facility, you must put a mask on. So that's going to be something that we're all going to have to deal with on a regular basis at our clubs and monitor and say, hey, don't forget your mask, don't forget your mask. I know it's a pain in the butt, but I think it's becoming a little more regular and routine for people. So that's going to be an important function going forward. This was the talk about the physical distancing and the 50 spectators indoors, so we're okay and covered on that. In the safety, we just talked about wearing a mask. Personally, I believe we should be wearing a mask while participating in the sport. If the simple thing of putting a mask on is going to save people from getting COVID, then to me, I'm all for it. CurlON has not come out and made it mandatory because the ministry hasn't made it mandatory. So we're encouraging, and I've heard from a lot of clubs who are they're just making it mandatory based on their member feedback. Totally up to your club and your return to play plans. Please take a hard look at and plan on that going forward as to what you need to do at your club level. We encourage surveying your clubs, right? That's a major thing, and we're happy to help you if you want to create a survey. I've done about 10 different clubs in Ontario, create a survey for them, sent them the link, they send it to the members, and then we just send them the report after with their updates, and then they can start planning on where they're going with that. Proper cleaning and disinfecting will be included in a document we're going to talk about later. Washing different stations. We got to create some hand sanitizing. People are coming in, people going on the ice, people come off the ice. Then you also have to have strong cleaning and sanitizing protocols for your club, i.e. washrooms, locker rooms, if you're going to go ahead and use them. And if you are going to use them, keep in mind, you need to be able to prove that you took the duty of care to keep those safe for everybody to use. And also be careful with the amount of people in the locker rooms at any one time, right? You might have to have people line up and go in and change their shoes and hang their coat up after the fact. So it's very important to have that and to keep a log of what you did, when you did it, because as Steve Indig said earlier, when it comes down to, look, here's what we did, here's what the club did on a given basis, and here's how they did it, here's their logs, and it was signed off by their employee and verified that by management that, yeah, they were in a consistent process of doing their cleaning, and we did what we could. And so that legal aspect comes into play, and that's how you protect yourself. We've created a new document, just an expansion of what was come up from the from Curling Canada's review and the document that was prepared. We did some interpretations. I'm just going to go through. I'm not going to go through the whole document because it'll take us all night. But I will just bring this down a bit, and it will show you some of the stuff, and you can easily look at it. It's going out to everybody this evening. There's some links here. It's all about a reopening. And it talks about interpretation. So what the deal is with the ministry. And anywhere in right is where we've got interpretations from different. The blue writing will be what was written up either in the, in this case, this would have been the framework for reopening of our province by the ministry. And then red would be interpretations. Again, here's all the stuff from that document. And then we go into the document from Curling Canada in regards to return to play guidelines. So here's things, so interpretations, and talking about locker rooms, and talking about all your cleaning return, show traffic markers. We have a package for you that we're going to be, we released last week. You're going to start to see that stuff arriving at your club in early September, ready to go. Be very, very careful on any rental stuff that you're going to charge to use. Please do not charge a COVID-19 cleaning fee. Those are illegal in Ontario, and the ministry is actively pursuing anybody. So you can charge a rental fee for a club room, let's say, because you have to clean it. Just do not call it a COVID-19 fee. It's a rental fee for the unit, even though you've never charged a rental fee maybe before for it. It's now a rental fee. It's a, you know, it's that. The other one is stones. Is a mandatory cleaning. We're going to come up with a whole attitude for a whole section on here. We're just in the finishing phases of it for ice techs and how they can, what their responsibilities are, and you know whether that's going to be assigned to the ice tech to clean the rock handles or whether it's going to be assigned to a different staff member. That's up to you at your club. All we're saying is that you must clean those rocks between every draw. And then the collecting of information we talked about, which is coming. Masks again is there. Championships. Can you hold the curling club champion a bonspiel? Let's say, in theory, yes. You must create a 50 participant league. You cannot have more than that. So that pretty much restricts you to 12 teams per division. You could run 2 divisions at that club during different times, keeping in mind the overlap of the people around the club and the maximum number of patrons you can have in the facility total at any given time. You could also have both leagues competing on the ice at the same time, i.e. when you get down to Sunday finals, you could have, you know, the A division on sheet 1 and the B division on sheet 3. That's not a problem. There's no restrictions there. It's just they can't cross over and play each other. That's the key thing. Insurance, Steve just spoke about, so we don't need to spend a lot of time on that. And then we have some updates to the programming problem. So this will be released very shortly to you this evening after this call, and you will have these documents coming up your way. And we look forward to any questions you have, and we'll try and answer them as quickly as we can.
Okay, thank you, Steve. We've got 20 minutes left in tonight. We've got a number of questions that have already come in. Many of the questions that have come in previously have been addressed or are addressed in the material we'll be sharing. But let me jump right into a couple operational questions. We do have some smaller clubs in Eastern Ontario. Are there any special considerations with regard to those small 2- and 3-sheet clubs that the listeners need to be cognizant of, or is everything that you've been talking about equally applicable?
From my perspective, everything's equally applicable. It comes down to the size of the lounge facility when you're dealing with how many people can be in there. Everybody should have an occupancy permit. For most of us are licensed under the AGCO, and usually they walk in and give you an occupancy list, which you either can get from them or from your local fire marshal. And it says that the building is licensed to have 50 people in this space. Well, if you're licensed to have 50 people, that's not with social distancing or physical distancing in cause and effect. So you got to be smart and realize it. I'm probably not going to be able to have that many people. The industry standard I'm hearing out there is 30%. I'm not saying that's the right number but that just seems to be a common number you hear for most facilities, that because of the spacing, they have to go to at about 30%. But you got to do your work. I've seen restaurants out there with measuring tapes, and the guys, spinning around with a measuring tape. That's not a bad idea, right? Take out a measuring tape, go for a walk.
Right. I think this really comes down to the broader question that has been asked several times. can these small 2 to 3, even 4 sheet clubs, with all of the additional requirements for cleaning, can they still be profitable?
It comes down to what you figure is your budget, and you got to do your business plan, right? And realize the cost of the business plan. Yeah, there's going to be some additional costs for cleaning supplies, cleaning more often, whether you're jobbing that out, hiring a company to come in and do the cleaning for you, or you're relying on your club or your volunteers to do that. You know, being a past member of a highly volunteer club and being the chief cook and bottle washer most of the days, I'm probably not too excited to have to go in and clean the washrooms every day. But if that's what is going to be needed to keep your club active and vibrant, then yeah, it's going to be important. There's going to be some costs. There's going to be some additional costs, and that may reflect in a minor increase to the membership cost. However you can do it to maintain your viability is important.
Right. I had a couple of clubs raise the prospect of trying to extend their liquor licenses into the on-ice area. And they're wondering, is there anything that would prevent that? What's the process, and any idea on what the level of cost would be? Nobody?
I don't know what the cost is, to be honest with you,
okay.
But I do know there is a process. You get a hold of the AGCO, and Steve Indig, if you have anything on there, you might have run into this before, but you get a hold of the AGCO and they come typically and evaluate your request and decide whether it's feasible. And if it is feasible, then you are granted that license extension. There usually is a ton of parameters around that. You know, but yeah, a lot of clubs have been successful in what they call licensing their backboard, for lack of a better term.
Okay, thanks, Steve. The final question on financial. Are you aware if there's any financial programs that are being offered through CurlON, Curl Canada, OVCA, or for that matter, provincial or local governments within the OVCA area? And I'll share this between you and Danny. Go ahead, Steve.
We, as part of that document, I'm just reopening it, we have a whole list of all the financial impact. I'm just reopening here, and then I can share my screen for you. Just get it going here, but there is a ton of them now. Part of the problem with a lot of the government programs is they were based on employment. They were based on having employees and having a system. So CEWS, for example, the Canadian Employment Relief Fund was all based on that. Sorry, I'm just ready to share here. And it required to have a tax account. They have come out with a few different ones. So there was, we've listed them all here in the document: the Canadian Emergency Wage Supplement, the 10% wage supplement, the loan business account, which is open, originally was only open to clubs or any business in Ontario that had a wage account, so had a tax account with the government for wages. They've now opened it up to any corporation in Ontario, and you are allowed to receive the $40,000 business loan with a $10,000 forgivable if paid by December of 2021, I believe, December 31st, 2021. It is available. There is a little extra hoops to go through if you're applying without a payroll tax account. If you're applying just strictly with a business number, that is. I saw a new one today called the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund. This is for small market enterprises, SMEs, to address gaps in any of their measures. So anybody that did not qualify for or has been rejected from current Government Canada relief measures, there is a fund available in here that might show some extras. There's the Canadian Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program. Ontario just recently launched they moved a bunch of the Trillium money and put it into a Resilient Community Fund. This fund allows not-for-profits in Ontario to apply under two entry points. One is September the 2nd, the other one is December the 2nd, and not-for-profit corporations are eligible to receive support funding for programs of between $5,000 and $100,000 over the next year. So that might be one to take a serious look at. Most of the other stuff in Ontario is deferrals more than anything, meaning they're not going to charge you interest and penalty on your taxes. They're not going to, you don't have to pay property taxes for 90 days from that, which is up due now, I think. WSIB is the same thing, it's due at the end of August. So a lot of those programs were not direct money to pocket. The only one I can think of that would be money to pocket would be the Trilling Foundation and a few of the federal, if you have a payroll account, and then the business account.
Okay. Steve, as a resource for everybody on the call, we've written pretty extensively on a lot of the government programs on our website as well, and we have some people may find the application process a little bit complicated. We have Kathy in our shop who's helping sport ascertain the government programs, so we can also provide some assistance there.
Thank you. Danny, is there anything from Curl Canada's perspective?
No, I mean, Steve's covered it really well. And I mean, unfortunately, not everybody can access funding,
right?
And especially if you don't have payroll and other expenses. You're a tiny club. That's just the government regulations. But it's been very well covered. I just sent you a link to with COVID-19 funding, federal government funding access that clubs can look at. It's on our website.
Okay, thank you, Danny. This is for Steve Indig. There's a two-part question. With regard to enforceability of the protocols established by the club, how strict do the clubs have to enforce those protocols in order to mitigate that liability? And then secondly are there additional protections available to boards, the directors on the board from any potential lawsuit?
Yeah, really good questions. You know, the flexibility of enforcing your regulations, in my opinion, is very limiting, if not any. As I've said before, you have an obligation to follow at minimum government regulations, and then failing to follow those recommendations from CurlON or from Curling Canada would open the club to exposure or potential liability. So ensuring that happens, I think, is prudent. The flexibility to not adhere to them, I guess, really from a legal perspective, is zero, particularly if it's a government regulation. The ability to protect yourselves as directors or officers of the association would be looking at those risk management strategies we talked about. 1, incorporation, 2, declarations, 3, waivers, and the 4th one would be an indemnification. So under the Ontario Corporations Act, which governs not-for-profits, it would be the Ontario Business Corporations Act that governs for-profits, speaks to the indemnity of directors. And in order to ascertain that indemnity, meaning to be put back in the same financial position you were prior to litigation, requires a not-for-profit's members to approve that kind of indemnification. So that's normally something I like to see in the bylaws. So if anybody doesn't have that indemnification language in their bylaws, they might want to look at a members agreement or a bylaw amendment to provide that extra layer of protection. The only caveat, of course, with that indemnification is the club would have to have the resources to indemnify and pay you back. So you do want to do a bit of a due diligence again on the club's ability to pay if you need it. So I'll stop there, Doug.
Doug, you're on mute.
A number of questions have come in with regard to the utilization of the sheets in the club and the number of players. I'm wondering, Steve, if you can comment if there are any specific restrictions on how the sheets are to be utilized and the allocation of the team members.
I think the return to play document that was created by Curling Canada was quite clear as to how we go on the ice. The ministry is not mandating any changes to the sport of curling in a sport like wrestling, you couldn't play the sport right now because it's long-term impact of being in a close contact, they call it. Whereas Steve Indig was just saying his son's playing his baseball league. That's not close contact, even though you're still at closer contact points at different times. So no, curling in theory could be played exactly as it's been played for 100,000 years. We just need to be smart about how we do it and give those opportunities for players. So that's why the document said something, said along the lines of one sweeper, just being more and more cautious. And like Steve Indig said, having that duty of care being a little higher than there's a line and, we're up here somewhere. We're very, very safe by being in that environment. So no, any club can operate as they seem fit and as their members and their committees have agreed to operate safely and effectively. We don't want to see another ban of this, and we don't want to be that club that says, hey, we caused 30 people to get sick, right? So that's the big thing.
Okay. Another question with regard to players. We know that many curlers, especially the older ones, like to play in multiple leagues, day, evening, etc. And there seems to be a number of opinions that they can or can't do that. Maybe you could clarify if there are any restrictions on how much you can play and when you can play.
This is a really good one for Steve Indig because, as he said, lawyers like to read contracts and documents, and I challenge him to read the document and say where you can't play in more than one league. We brought that to the ministry's announcement, and their answer was, oh, whoops. We're supposed to be living in 10-person bubbles in Ontario right now. Who's counting your 10-person bubble? Who's going to count the 50 people in a league, whether that league? The ministry basically has said, and I see Steve going, oh God, he's going down the path here, but the ministry's basically said there's no restriction against somebody playing in more than one league. You could join 3 different curling clubs in theory and be a member of 3 different clubs. It's a pretty tough call for anybody on this phone or on this to verify that Steve Chenier is curling at the Ottawa club and curling at the Rideau club and also curling at the other club. And I'm not saying that it's fair game go forward, but that's unfortunately the way the ministry wrote the rules. And they just said that you're supposed to play in a 50-person league, and you can't cross over from you can't play other teams in other leagues. It does not talk about individuals.
That was the other Steve. Did you have any comment on that? No?
Yeah, I'm still here, guys. My connection's a little slow, so I just turned off my camera. I agree, Steve Chenier, that the interpretation and the intent was one cohort. So I think until you have clarifications, we have to err on the side of caution, which says one league until we can figure out what the clarification is. There is a lot of confusion in the regulations and what's come out, and we're trying slowly to get answers on what that means. I just got an email while we were on this webinar, from a very, very large facility who has 6 soccer fields saying, can we have 50 people per field, or is it 50 people in a stadium that sits 6 soccer fields? And the interpretation they got from the government was 50 people in the facility. So they're also looking for clarification on that type of language. It's like saying that only 50 people can be in the Air Canada, I guess it's not Air Canada Centre anymore, but or in a hockey facility that sits 30,000 people. So we need to know those, and we don't know those answers quite yet. But I would say right now we have to stick to the strict meaning of the interpretation, which would be 50 cohort, and you're in one cohort.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I want to change gears a little bit and talk about some of the developmental programs clubs have. Is there any special guidance or advice that you can share with the audience with regard to the Learn to Curl programs or their Little Rock programs? A few moments ago, I think I heard someone say children at the ages of 8 and under, there may be a problem because we can't get them to social distance. So any comment?
So as part of that document that we're releasing tonight, we have some suggestions around youth programming, adult learn to curl, clinic team programs, private lessons. Mostly, we don't want to dissuade youth programming because it's the backbone of our sport from the future. If we go through a phase of a year or two without having youth in the sport, we could be really facing a problem in 20, 25 years from now or 15 years from now. So we've created a couple of ideas. One of them is instructors need to use masks while in close proximity to youth. You got to be careful on your fan accessing the building, making sure that you're on your capacity. So if mom or dad's dropping off their son or daughter at the curling club, to be careful. Danny and Curling Canada have created a great 3-on-3 format for curling, which really works well under these scenarios. It keeps the kids more engaged. You don't have somebody standing around waiting to sweep or waiting to throw. 3-on-3 is very good. So I put a link to the documentation from Curling Canada, which gives you that idea. Same thing with adult learn to curls, right? You need to basically be careful and make sure that you're showing that as best you can, that physical distancing. We're allowed to play the sport without it. So we're recommending an 8-to-1 athlete to instructor ratio. We're also recommending that your groups must be restricted to 50, obviously. And then again, instructors who are going to be getting down in the hack and helping somebody really need to wear masks and should be very, very cautious with their attempts. I've been watching people give lessons on the golf course with the same parameters, right? They've been wearing their masks. They've been wearing masks and carrying on, so it works very well.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
I laugh, Steve. One of the things my son did a golf camp a couple weeks ago, and they actually made them walk around in hula hoops, which I thought was a pretty cool risk management technique to keep an 8-year-old socially distanced. So I thought that was pretty creative.
I got 2 last questions. We're running out of time. Maybe we can quickly comment that in the event that there is a small or a secondary outbreak of COVID within the club, what's the best advice for a club?
Contact your public health official immediately. If you think there's been any form of, I'm not a doctor, I'm not even a lawyer. Steve might have a different opinion here, but my suggestion is contact your public health. That would be your safest.
Yeah.
Let them guide you.
Okay.
Short answer, Steve, is 100% correct. The other thing is a lot of people have, that kind of leads me to another query that comes in a lot, is what are we allowed to say and what are we not allowed to say? And this is protected by health information. And there actually are exceptions in privacy legislation that speaks to public welfare. So our ability to disclose that we may have had an outbreak in the club and that a person may have been in close contact with the point A, then I think we would be okay from a legal perspective. So I definitely like reaching out to your public authority to talk about what the best thing to do, but also notifying your members, especially those who may have been exposed. I don't see any legal reason to say why we wouldn't be able to do that. I'm not saying we say Joe Smith is the culprit, but we do say, somebody within your cohort has a positive test. You should, go do your due diligence to make sure you're protected as well.
I do know, as a follow-up too, is anybody who's been, if let's for example, I was in your club last night and I suddenly woke up this morning with symptoms and I went and got tested and they came back, the public health unit is then contacted by the testing agent and they take over, right? They don't want the club doing all the public announcements or anything. They take over. They will contact you. That's why we're creating this app, to help you. You'll just turn over your information and say, here's the people that were in the building roughly at the same time as that sick Chenier bugger, and away they go.
Last question. What's going to happen about CurlON and Curl Canada competitive schedule this year? And are our clubs going to be asked to host events? Danny, Steve?
Well, from our perspective, we have go, no-go dates that we've established to look and see if we can safely and to everybody's satisfaction hold a championship. We actually have an announcement tomorrow that people will see, and we'll be addressing all of our other events in the next month or so about whether they're going to happen or not. And again, if we can't do things safely and healthy, then we have to look at different options. But those announcements will be coming out very, very soon.
Thanks, Danny. Steve?
We're in the same boat, right? If we can't hold an event safely, it's just not. And, there's bigger risk than just holding it at the club. There's the volunteers, the travel, the the players, the coaches, everybody that's involved. So we're closely monitoring this situation, and we'll follow the lead of Curling Canada as we go forward. You know, this could be a year where we really concentrate on our curling members and trying to keep our facilities active and vibrant in that situation. So,
thanks, Steve.
So Doug, if I could just jump in on behalf of the OVCA, we had discussions about our events, the mixed and the men's. At this point, we're sort of in the same situation as everybody else. Right now, we're planning as if it's going ahead. So there will be people contacting Clubs for Ice, and then as we get closer to the event, there will be a go, no-go decision based on the most up-to-date public health information available. Right. So the OVCA events are at this point a go until we hit the date where it's a go or no-go.
Good. Thanks, Paul. Now, I know for all the attendees on the phone, we may have not got to your question because we had to skip over a few or consolidate. If your question was not asked and answered, if you want to resend them in to Paul, we will do our best to try to provide a written response to you. I don't know how quickly, but we'll endeavor to try to do that. On behalf of the OVCA, I'd like to thank Danny, Steve Chenier, Steve Indig for the time and effort in preparing for this, the materials, and for making the presentations here this evening. And to the OVCA, thank you very much for the invitation. And to the attendees, thank you. If it wasn't for your questions, this would only been 20 minutes if we would have got rid of Steve Indig. But then, so I want to thank you all for your time, your patience, and your questions. I want to wish you good curling and all the very best success this curling season. Good night.
Night, everyone.